Takes a few seconds to get started. We're going live there. How are you guys doing? Good to see you guys again.
You
Howard,
too.
Cameron, how are you?
Good.
Good.
Happy
Good to
Tuesday.
see you again.
Yeah.
You guys
Thanks for
staying
having
safe
us.
out there?
For the most part.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like everyone's kind of getting settled in here. So we'll go ahead and get this started. Welcome back, everyone. My name is Ben Jacobson with Page One Power. I'm a digital marketing strategist here, and we're back with another episode of SEO from Home. Today we have another special guest with us. We have two special guests, in fact. We're going to have a guest host today. His name's Tyler Bain. He's a project manager with us here at Page One Power. He works day in and day out with all of our clients and all of our companies that we work with. And then we have another special guest, Kameron Jenkins from Spotify. She is going to be giving a presentation today on burnout inside of SEO. I think right now with the current circumstances and kind of how everything is playing out, I think a lot of us might be feeling a little bit of the pressure of kind of the day in and day out. And so they're going to be discussing and having a conversation about burnout and how you can change your environment, how you can take control of the situation and try to make that as best as you can. So I'm going to let them take over. We are encouraging you guys to ask any questions that you have as they come up. We'll do our best to kind of answer those real time if we can. If not, we'll definitely try to do our best to get to those at the end. We're also going to be live tweeting today. So if you guys want to participate that way, you can definitely tag hashtag SEO from home and tag at Page One Power. We'll try to engage that conversation there as well. We're going to be recording today's episode as well. So if you guys want to watch that later on, you can definitely do that, pageonepower.com. Try to have those up within a day or two. Yeah, I think we're good to go. I'll go ahead and let you guys take it over from here. Cameron, go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. Yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself, Cameron. Give a little background, things like that.
Sounds good. Yeah. Hey, everyone. I am Kameron Jenkins. Currently, I'm the director of content at Spotify. Spotify is an enterprise SEO software suite. I've been there for a little over a year. Before that, I was at Moz doing content, working on their content marketing team. But the bulk of my career has actually been in agency side. So I worked for a little over 6 years at a digital marketing agency, leading the SEO team there and the content team there. So that kind of part of my experience is really like where a lot of this is drawn from, the SEO burnout type of conversation. So yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this today. I think whether you're a practitioner day to day, whether you do SEO sometimes, occasionally, whether you're in-house or agency side, or whether you work for a vendor like me, I think anyone who's in or touches the SEO space hopefully this will resonate. And yeah, definitely feel free to ask questions throughout. I would love to chat with you about my experience. Everyone's experiences are different, but hopefully just, being able to talk through our collective experiences, we can help each other get through burnout. So yeah, that's me.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And speaking of your previous work, what really inspired you to write this particular article? Why now? Other than maybe some of the obvious or the obvious, could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So the article is something funny enough. So, running content on Spotify, we have a content calendar that I had put together a while ago. It's always kind of changing and evolving, but SEO burnout was a topic that has been on there for a couple of months, funny enough, and I didn't realize it was there. I was just kind of scrolling through, doing some inventory on our content calendar and just, looking at things, seeing if anything needed to be adjusted or changed or, as things evolve over time. And I saw that one on there and I was like, why haven't I done this one yet? So that one was interesting because I had also recently posted on Twitter just about like, do you deal with this too kind of thing? And I got a lot of response. It seemed to resonate with a lot of people because I got a ton of responses, a ton of people saying like, this is what causes burnout for me. This is what I do when I feel burnt out. And so there was just a lot of conversation around it. So I was like, hey, like this kind of indicates to me that it's a good time to talk about it and just get it out there in the open. So that was the kind of impetus for the article, something that clearly was on my mind like months before and has been on my mind before, but something that I was just like, it just seems like a good time. Everyone's kind of talking about it and let's just do it now.
Well, and it does seem like there's so many different forms of burnout that isn't just specific to SEO, but it is very much in the air. People are working from home who might not have ever, or maybe very seldomly. And in turn, I think that it's it's great that we can talk about this within this specific industry where, burnout in general it can be felt across the board, but what does it look like with SEO burnout specifically? And so do you think that given the circumstance, is it easier or harder to do SEO at home, given that the vast majority of us are now?
Yeah, I think so. It's interesting. I mean, I know for me personally, and this is really going to depend on the type of person, which is what I've learned. Like I've been working remotely, working from home for a little over 2 years. So I've been doing this for a while. I started when I left my agency and went to work for Moz. They're in Seattle, so I've been working remotely since then. And Spotify is in New York and a few other places, so I'm not with them. So I think I do, and like a lot of people, probably miss being in office with their stakeholders, whether that be if you're in an agency, whether that be your team and you can collaborate with those people. So I would say like people who work in an agency are at a little bit of an advantage almost, I would say, because they're used to communicating with clients who aren't sitting right next to them. They're already kind of used to translating their SEO work, via phone call or something not face-to-face. But yeah, I mean, it was definitely hard for me to transition from working in an office with people to working from home. There's a lot of unique challenges to that. You miss a lot of the context and the nuance and things like that. So that can, I think, contribute. So I don't know. I mean, if people are feeling that way, I wouldn't be surprised just because that's how I felt. There's just a lot of stuff that gets missed when you're not able to just like look over and see someone.
Yeah, to bother people constantly and with good questions and or just building relationships. And I use the word bother more in a funny sense, but it's there is that camaraderie there, like that togetherness that it can really feel like you're an island. And it's actually something I want to explore a little bit later, especially for SEOs where there might be, we're encompassing all of SEO. So we are talking about organic as well as PPC and other things like that. And those sometimes you have a team, sometimes it's you versus the world, it can feel like. But we did have actually, with that in mind, Heather asked a question. Occasionally a team member in my organic search group indicates that they're losing their spark for SEO. What recommendations do you have to reignite that passion and excitement around what we do?
Yeah, that's such a good question. That actually came up when I mentioned that when I posed this question on Twitter. That's something that a few people had mentioned, like, oh, it just feels so monotonous. It feels like it's the same all of the time, which can be true. I mean, depending on what type of SEO you do, like that can definitely be true. So I got like 2 really interesting suggestions, and I can identify with both of them for different reasons. But one person said for them, going back to the fundamentals and the basics of what got them excited in the first place, that really helped them. So if they're starting to feel like drained and not super happy with what they're doing, going back to what first got them excited, whatever that may be for this person, seemed to really help. The other person said, the other side of that coin, I got advice regarding like you might want to explore a new strategy or something you've never done before, something innovative and new that could potentially enhance your day-to-day. Like it's something that you need to do, but you've never done it this particular way. So kind of, a new strategy or a new way of executing something that you need to do could potentially reinvigorate you if you're feeling like, oh man, this is monotonous, or I'm just not excited about this anymore. Kind of adding a new skill or just like a new piece of knowledge can potentially help with that. But that's hard. I've been there. I definitely empathize with that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think like planning out a vacation or some kind of trip in the future, especially now where you really can't travel unless it's very local or literally just going out in your front yard. Right. I think that it's important to utilize what you were saying about trying a new tactic. Almost utilizing that you could as a reward. You get your current work done that you might feel is monotonous, and in turn, because you want to work on that new project or you want to try that new thing, that could become later on that stuff that is more monotonous and more routine. But it is a fine balance, and I think that's a good way to look at it. Is trying something new and different. Thank you for the question, Heather, very much. Yeah. Do you think that in talking about trying new things, I think that this is almost the exact opposite, where do you think that unpredictability, there you go.
Oh,
the unpredictability of SEO is potentially a big cause for burnout?
Yeah, I definitely, so that's something I included, I think, pretty early on in that article, just because it came up so much. There's a lot of volatility, obviously, and there's a huge element to SEO where you can do the work and you can guarantee your effort. You could do everything right. You could do everything according to best practices as you read them, but still not be moving the needle. And that's definitely something I've experienced and something that's been super frustrating for me in the past. Like I struggle with, even now having a job where I can work really hard and do all of these things and I can guarantee the effort I put in, but I can't guarantee that it's actually going to, produce the result that I'm being judged on,
Yeah.
so that can be super, super frustrating. I think it's something that's super deflating, but I don't know, when it comes to volatility, like I definitely think that kind of spinning that on its head and making it something that's exciting rather than a challenge. Like, yeah, we can't predict the efforts, but isn't that interesting that we learned something? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like just by doing like, I've heard a lot of people say this, like, look, don't look at failed experiments or failed tactics as a failure. Look at it as something that like, okay, we tried it. We learned that doesn't have the effect that we thought. And just having that be a success in and of itself is potentially something that can help with that. But it's hard. It definitely is hard.
Yeah. Well, and I think that it does come with risk and depending on where you are within the organization or even where your department, how your department is looked organizationally can influence that. And actually that brings me to, in the article specifically, you mentioned that not having a seat at the table can be a really big cause for SEO issues or complications. Do you think that, why do you think that this happens, and is there anything that can combat that or be able to work around that?
Yeah, this is a big one too. I think I thought a lot about it, and we actually just recently did some research on it at Botify, where we commissioned Forrester to kind of like poll and survey a lot of organizations just to kind of gauge their SEO maturity. And based on their maturity model, they found that only 14% of organizations can really be considered like SEO mature, like the top of the top. And that doesn't really surprise me, because when it comes to like how often I hear SEOs say like, oh, SEO wasn't considered before A, B, or C was done, or we're never considered, we're never invited to meetings, we're never asked our opinion. And, as often as I hear that, it doesn't surprise me that only 14% aren't mature. And I think just, when it comes to SEO, like you don't prioritize what you don't value, and you don't value what you don't know about. So I think when it comes to that, it's kind of like this, you really have to like push for evangelizing SEO, which can be hard. I know for myself, I felt like a really small rudder trying to turn a really big ship in the past before, and you just feel like you're yelling into this void and no one's listening to you. And sometimes like it's too hard for one person to move an organization. But I think like trying to find to those organizations, like maybe pivoting your career to finding that organization who really does value SEO, and you don't have to like spend all of your time fighting for that, can be really beneficial. But obviously like not everyone has the luxury of being at like a super SEO mature company. So I think when it comes down to that, just like education and training matters so much. And at the end of the day, if they don't listen to your training or education, just showing them the numbers sometimes is what it takes. Like, hey, look, you changed this on this day and our traffic tanked after that. It's hard to argue with the data. So that's something that could potentially help combat that as well.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that. It's not, it's hard to argue against the data, especially when these people that are at the table, if you will, I think are individuals that might be more data driven, or, everyone's slightly different, but more than likely you might be having to communicate to the head of marketing or the CFO or somebody in your organization where it's like they're balancing the 15 other things and they sometimes just want to see that you're doing well. And I think that in that, and in doing well, can you talk about the importance of celebrating small goals and how to and how that might be involved in SEO burnout in general?
Yeah, definitely. I think so. In the past, especially like in my agency days and earlier on in my agency days, we'd have these, and this was back to like SEO was still fairly, I feel like a lot of people didn't really know how to make it work, and we're still like coming out of these like shady tactic-y type of days. And so it wasn't super advanced. So we'd have these like maybe one or two KPIs, like we want this client to rank for this top tail keyword. And we like this really this really difficult keyword, and that's like our main metric of success, like that one keyword, and we're just watching how they perform on that one keyword. Yeah. And we would do all of these other strategies and not be measuring the success or failure of all those things because we were only watching this big macro goal. And that could be super deflating because we're doing all of these things that are probably having an effect, but we're not measuring that. We're measuring only that one big KPI. So I think like that definitely has led to burnout for me, and maybe that resonates with other people. Maybe some people are like way more mature with their measurement strategy and their KPIs, don't know where you land with that, but I think it's definitely important to like take your big goal. That's fine to have big macro goals, but break that down into like, okay, what does it take to get there? And not only measure those like little micro goals, but celebrate them too. Like, hey, look, we like increased Google's crawl on this one page, or hey, like we got this page ranking for these other keywords. It might not be your big keyword that you care about, but it's, you know, showing signs of progress is I think something that can help keep us going. Because when we don't get that like reward, we're just not motivated to keep working on it. If we just see everything flatline, it's like, well, why am I even trying? Why do I even bother? So I definitely think that like small goals are super important. You know, just breaking that down and actually measuring other things than just like your one big macro goal.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that. I think that it can be easy to forget some of the fundamentals, not only with SEO, but in life in general, where if you were to have a 5-year plan for yourself, and let's say that it, for someone who might be a little bit younger, it might be graduating college. Not to skew just like only young people go to college, but that might be your end goal. And it doesn't count all the, well, that means you have to go to class every day. That means you have to probably wake up around 7 o'clock in the morning and like accomplish all these things to get to that end goal. And I'm glad that you're mentioning that, because I do think that there are times where people don't talk about and or they might feel like they're the only ones feeling it, you know, or that it's like, well, they care about this one thing, and so they're not going to care about these small things, and in turn they won't if no one says anything about them. Or like you said, if they're not celebrating it and you're not evangelizing yourself, very much like you mentioned earlier in evangelizing what somebody is doing in the SEO world. Andrew asked, do you have a specific suggestion for getting out of a rut for someone who works on link building outreach day in and day out? One of the most monstrous tasks in the SEO world in general.
Yeah, that's definitely, so I've heard this, so I've never personally had link building as part of my job. I just haven't, and we can get to that later when it comes to like SEO and how many different facets and types there are. I'd love to talk about that before. So me personally, I have never directly worked, at least full-time, on link outreach and things like that. But I have heard from my friends and colleagues who do work in that space that it is a really defeating industry. It can be sometimes, just because there's so many people who are just like, you know, white noise, almost like, you know, I talk to my sales team and it mirrors a lot of what they experience, the SDRs, because it's almost like selling content. Like, hey, my content's really great. Will you link to me? And they're saying like, hey, my product's really great. Will you buy it? I mean, it's very similar content sales versus like software sales or something. So I get like you're only going to have so much of a response rate and a success rate. And that can be really hard. But I think like there could be a lot of parallels to kind of like putting a new strategy in your toolkit, similar to how we talked about before. Like if something becomes monotonous, or you're losing your spark for something, I think that strategy could be helpful. Like just change it up, try something completely new that you've never tried before. Because I know a lot of times like there are templates, and templates are really good. Templates are based on things that work and are repeatable, and it helps us save time. But you know, when things are becoming stagnant or stale or maybe even boring, it could be good to just completely change it up and say like, let's just try it. Let's just try this other thing. So I think like experimentation can kind of help liven up some of those things.
And I think that can go back into what you mentioned about celebrating those small victories or having the small goals in mind, is that when you do have an outreach that is successful and that even does become a template potentially, you know, you don't just create a template and then necessarily send it out, or you might have more success if you give it a try a couple times beforehand. But yeah, I think that's incredibly important. And I'm excited to talk more about some of that background in that outreach. Is that I'm a project manager now, but I've been a team manager as well as a link builder in doing that outreach. And it can be incredibly discouraging I've never had it compared to sales before, but it does make sense now that you say that.
Yeah.
And I've been doing this for over 7 years.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something where you do have, just like telemarketers, you might have that immediate no, or someone's going to mess with you, or there could be so many opportunities for discouragement or to be discouraged. And I think in turn, it's celebrating those small victories, talking to one another about the struggles and also the success that you've had. And some of the most genuine feelings I've had is where I know that a website can benefit from a client's resource. And it's like, I know that there's some end goal things here with potential conversions and traffic and things like that, but your website, it's insane that it doesn't have this, and there's some that true passion and helpfulness that is involved in SEO and holding on to those in the, that flame that's in that darkness of the no's and the whatevers, or more aggressive language that could be used sometimes in outreach. But yeah, thank you for that question, Andrew. And so we're actually, that could bring us to, it seems like there's obviously a lot of different types of SEO. Do you notice that having that many variety of types cause different forms of burnout, or almost like the same universally in some of the research that you've done?
Right. Yeah. So I think like one of the things, at least for me, that has burned me out in the past is kind of like this deflating feeling of I have to know everything. And I think like that comes from the fact that, excuse me, SEO is so varied. Like there are so many different facets of it. You have local SEO, you have link building, you have people who work on enterprise websites, you have technical SEO, you have people that just focus on like JavaScript SEO. You have so many different varieties of SEO that if you just peered into like SEO Twitter, or you just peered into like Search Engine Journal or something like that, you might fall under the assumption that like, oh, I guess I have to learn Python now, or oh, I guess I have to learn like, all of this stuff, and it can be really frustrating. And I definitely went through that. I was like, man, do I have to add all these skills to my toolbox? And it started getting really defeating because I'm like, how good can I be at content and technical and all of these different facets in between? And I think when I realized that you can pick something and then just focus on being good at that, like it sounds really simple, but it's something that I didn't realize for a while. And I think what can be helpful is deciding on what your niche is. Like, what do I do? What do I have to do? What's the job I need to do? Or what's the job I want? You can have that kind of as a goal in mind too. So what is it that I need to do? And then kind of reverse engineering from that and saying like, okay, what are the skills and tools I need to be able to do that thing? And then focus on building those skill sets and those tools. And then like not letting anyone make you feel bad for not knowing the other stuff. If you're a local SEO and you're reading all the stuff about Python, don't let people make you feel bad for not knowing Python or machine learning. Like you don't need to know that. Or if you want to, cool, it's a hobby. Yeah. You can learn that on the side or something else, but putting that pressure on yourself to like, oh, I have to know all of these things because SEO touches so many different disciplines and SEO looks different on different types of websites even. It can be really defeating and discouraging. So each facet has its own stressors and own things that makes it hard. But then on top of that, I think we put undue pressure on ourselves to kind of know everything that every type of SEO would need to know. And that's just not the case.
Yeah. And I think it's that going back to feeling, experimenting with things or trying new things when you are feeling burnout. You can also, I think that there might be feelings of not wanting to show that weakness, or that if you're an SEO, it encompasses everything. And there could be a fear in not asking questions. And in turn, you might not be able to grow because you're a jack of all trades and the master of none, or you're not giving yourself that opportunity to focus on a particular area. And it's very similar within our organization as well, where we have even our writers. They can write almost anything SEO or for almost any client, but there are people who specialize in certain things, cryptocurrency, tax law information, and things like that. And it's great to have those, but it's like you said, relying on those other individuals to be like, you take care of those technical audits, because I know that you've like never done outreach before. So let me do that. I've done it for years. And I think that that's incredibly important. And I think in turn, it can make people feel less of an island, and that we're in this together, and potentially foster less burnout. in a
Absolutely.
perfect world. But I was curious, when do you think that there might be a negative stigma around burnout in general? Do you think that it's something that's used to describe or explain maybe just a bad working situation, or could you kind of go into your thoughts about the burnout stigma, maybe?
Yeah, I think, yeah, there's a couple that I can think of off the top of my head. I mean, I know when I first started feeling burnout when I was at my agency, it was within the first year in my agency. And I think that's
Hmm.
normal because I'm like getting, this is all new to me. SEO is a brand new thing. And I think just like getting all of that new information and the new stressors, like getting introduced to that was super, super frustrating for me. And I think I was super nervous to reach out to anyone and tell them that I was feeling burned out because I thought that people would, consider that like weakness or say that like, oh, you're just complaining, like stop complaining. I was really scared about it. And I would definitely say like burnout is a specific thing. Like it's definitely not, don't feel like you're complaining. Don't feel like it's not that. It's that you're literally like so emotionally, psychologically, even physically exhausted by these stressors that you're dealing with that you aren't able to function as you should be able to function. And that's a serious thing that we should address, and we shouldn't have to feel bad for bringing that up. I know when I brought it up, thank God I brought it up to someone who like responded saying like, do not feel bad for bringing this up. You're actually brave for bringing this up. And I would tell anyone the same thing, like you're brave for
Yeah.
admitting you feel burnt out and you have to do something about it. So I definitely think that there are some stigmas around burnout, like it's a certain failure or something like that. And I also feel like sometimes people on the other side of that could use burnout to describe things that are just frustrating or things that are wrong. It's like it's not a you problem when it's burnout. I feel like sometimes I'm talking to some people who are very frustrated with their jobs right now, and rightfully so. So it's not as if it's a personal failing as much as it is like, yeah, like that's not your fault. You definitely, this isn't on you. So I think sometimes it's confusing potentially, like, is this a me problem or is this an external problem? So
Yeah.
figuring that out can be complicated too.
Gotcha. And I think that that makes sense. And in turn, we actually got another question asking, how do you bring burnout up to your team or bosses without risking your job? You mentioned that you did that yourself. What was your, spoilers, I know it ended apparently well, but yeah, how was that experience, or how would
Right.
you recommend others bringing that up?
Yeah, definitely. So because I was fairly new at my company, like I said, it was within the first year of me being there. I actually went to someone who I knew was close to my boss, but it wasn't my boss. It was actually a coworker of mine, and she had been there longer than I had. And so I kind of positioned it as, and I'm not saying like this is right for everyone. It turned out to be a good option for me. So I just went to her and I said, like, look, you know our boss better than I do. You've been in this industry longer than I have. Am I justified in feeling this way? And what would you recommend I do? Because I don't know how to approach this situation. And she was able to give me advice. So I would say if you are kind of like unsure about reaching out to someone who can actually make changes and like talk to you about your job, like your boss probably, then maybe going to someone who has dealt with that before, or someone who has dealt with your boss
Yeah.
on a similar topic before, and just asking their advice and just saying like, how would you recommend that I approach this? Because sometimes it is like a sensitive thing. You might not get your boss's time very often, so you don't want to you want to make the most of it and make sure that you're approaching it the right way. So yeah, for me, that was going to a coworker who I knew had done that before.
I think that's great advice. And I think that it makes sense to, very much like you said, you might not have your boss's time that often, be it a big boss to a manager, something like that. And I also think like working in a lot of certain different industries, you want to get buy-in initially. And I think that going for somebody who knew that they had some kind of relationship with the boss maybe can give you some advice where it's like, hey, maybe or here's how you can bring it up, not don't bring it up, but
Yeah.
in turn encourage you, like, here's a great time, not you just so happen to see them in the bathroom and you're like, hey, I gotta tell you, I'm
Yeah.
feeling burned out here,
Uh-huh.
or something like that.
Exactly.
It's choose a best time, most appropriate. And I think I think it brings up other issues. If you really don't have any of those things, then I think it becomes a bigger issue than just burnout. Like I think you were alluding to earlier, if you can't say these things or there's literally nobody, then I think that might be some other, you might need to reflect a little bit differently on your current position, job, things like that.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that burnout could get confusing in that sense. And I'm glad you answered that earlier as well, where, what is burnout? What's the stigma around it? Things like that.
Yeah, definitely.
And speaking of feeling like you're, like you have to be an expert or, not knowing when to say certain things, you mentioned in your article that there's this stigma of like keeping up with the Joneses and comparing each other or yourself to other SEOs, be it within your own organization or outside of it. Is there anything that could be done or any advice that you would have for working better together or be it as a whole or within your organization?
Right. I think that one can be different depending on like what unique thing you're struggling with. Like I know there are people who struggle with, and myself included, have struggled with like, oh, I have to speak at more conferences because I guess I'm supposed to be like famous and put myself out there, or oh, I don't have as many Twitter followers as so-and-so, or maybe it's just that, like I feel like I have to post like the most brilliant thing on Twitter and then I get ridiculed for it. And now I'm discouraged. And there's so much of this, like really what it boils down to is like interpersonal stuff that can discourage you. Especially as it relates to like your public persona. So when it comes to that, I mean, I would say that like definitely it has helped me personally, I'll say, to not look at it so much as like, hey, I'm like trying to get my personal brand out there. Just like look at it more in the sense of like, I'm creating connections. So if you speak at a conference, awesome, that's great. And it probably could help your personal brand or your company's brand or whatever the larger goal is for that. Or maybe it was just a personal challenge to yourself. Think about the reasons you're doing it and try to keep focusing on like, I'm not doing this to be famous. I'm doing this to connect with other people. I'm doing this to build up my business or whatever it is. Like just making sure that you kind of like keep that in check because it is really easy. It's a slippery slope to slide into like, oh, like I didn't do as well. I'm not as famous as these other speakers, or I don't have as many followers as this person or that person. And then the other side of that coin is like, there's definitely can be some hostility in the SEO industry. And I say that cautiously because there's so many kind and awesome people in the SEO space, but there are definitely people who kind of come at it from like, someone says something subjective, like, hey, this worked for me. And then someone will comment and be like, no, that's wrong. You're wrong. What a dumb person for saying that. Like, that's an exaggeration, but there's that type of conversation going on in some SEO spheres. And I think like, we would all do so much better if we were just kind, like realize what's subjective versus objective. Like, is that wrong or just not true in your experience? And if something is objectively wrong, like just think back to the times that you didn't know that stuff. Like you haven't always known this stuff. So I would say like, let's just take a minute. And like, if you see something that you're like, oh man, that's wrong. And like, how could this person believe that? Be kind or answer them privately. I feel like a lot of times people don't take advantage of that. Like don't shame people. It's not necessary. Like you have not benefited from making this person look dumb. So I think like being kind and focusing on connections over fame can help with those things, but it's hard.
Gotcha. Well, and I think that you mentioned earlier how in the SEO world, you can focus on a specific specialization, and that might not always be that jack of all trades or the technical side of things, so on and so forth. And I think very similar to that keeping up with the Joneses, not spreading yourself too thin and doing the conferences or everything like that you might perceive as being famous. There you can do, like you said, you could be, Twitter famous, or again, you can do these things to help individuals, and that might be writing long posts like yours. Just like you doing this video conference now, I think it's incredibly brave and also fantastic in general. But your piece alone is something that is great, and if that's what you're an expert at and what you're comfortable with, that's a great way to express yourself and or utilize your strengths.
Totally.
And I think it's incredibly important.
Yeah, I think too, I mean, you just made me think of something else where I've talked to a lot of our customers, for example. A lot of our customers at Spotify are in-house SEOs and they work for like big organizations. They're very busy. They work for organizations that don't always like to put their name out there or put their strategies out there. So the bigger the brand, the often like the tighter the gatekeeping rather. So they don't always get to speak at these conferences. They don't get to, be famous, so to speak. So I think for them, sometimes I've spoken with some of them and they felt like, oh man, like I'm not doing as well in SEO. I'm like, are you kidding me? You're the SEO with this like Fortune 500 company. You're doing great. And I think like our measure of success sometimes is off. So I feel like it's just very relative to what you want to do. Like, do you want to, like, are you doing a good job? Are you where you're at? You want to be in your career? If yes, then don't worry about the rest. But, if your goal is like presenting at conferences and things like that, yeah, sure, make that your goal. That's fine. But I think like not kind of borrowing from other people's goals and trying to hold yourself to that standard, because like if you're succeeding in what you have chosen that you want to do or you need to do for your job, then that should be enough.
It goes back to celebrating those small goals, those small victories and things like that. And I think that is incredibly important in a way to combat that. And I think that all this is also to be saying that it doesn't mean that those things go away. No different than just talking about burnout doesn't mean that it's like, oh, great, it's out there now.
You've solved it.
Now it's not inside. I'm
Yeah.
not, it doesn't automatically make it better. It does take a certain amount of effort or self-reflection or other things like that. But I think that the more people talk about this and the more advice is given, I think that in turn you can see someone who's a reflection of you within another circumstance, organization, something like that, be like, that's what I need to do. And in turn, I don't think that SEOs in general realize how much that they influence each other for all the positivity and negativity in that space as well. I think that's incredibly important. And in talking about influencers and stars and things like that within the SEO space specifically, do you think that these personalities put unnecessary pressure and in turn potentially facilitate burnout? That might be a little more open than I want it to be, but what do you think of their presence as far as influencing that keeping up with the Joneses kind of feel that is out there?
Right. I think that's definitely like a byproduct. And it's something I want to be careful about as well. Anytime I do something like speak at a conference or something like that, I'm always kind of like, I wonder if this makes other people that follow me feel like they have to do it. So I think there's always a risk of that. And that's something that we can kind of combat through just like the way we talk about things like, hey, I'm speaking at this conference. I'm doing it as like a personal challenge for myself. And just like the way we talk about those things can be really helpful, because I do think like sometimes just by nature of like seeing these people who have all these followers, they're speaking at all of these conferences, like, it's not necessarily like they're proactively doing something to make us feel bad, but just by nature of seeing that, we are holding ourselves to that standard. So it goes both ways, right? Like, yeah. I think people who are influencers and have a lot of clout, like they should use their platforms to, spread these messages and make people understand that like, hey, you don't have to, like, you could be doing awesome work even without the followers that I have. And I think that's such an interesting thing too, because like there are so many people who are brilliant and they have 10 followers. And I know for me, like when I first got on Twitter, I know a few people like, when I first started like doing Whiteboard Fridays with Moz or something, people would be like, oh, she's like an up and coming SEO. I'm like, I've been doing this for like 7 years. Like it was just weird to be called a beginner, but people were thinking I was a beginner just because I had never been like publicly, talking about stuff before. So I think it's like, it definitely goes both ways. It's an assumption thing. And then it's also like, we could be doing more if we do have a platform to tell people like, look, this is what I'm doing. There's probably so many brilliant SEOs that aren't even on Twitter, that aren't even doing these public things that are brilliant. So, and just being fine with that. I think like it goes both ways. Yeah.
Gotcha. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that it is tough. And I couldn't imagine, it'd be interesting to do almost another one of these and talking about burnout and in turn utilizing only those influencers and how they specifically feel about burnout themselves. And there are people who answered in your, which I would highly encourage everyone to reread the article and follow some of these people on Twitter where they are incredibly influential and they are just within their, and they're talking about these things that happen to people who are in their first year or have been there for 7+ years. So And I think that, and in turn, speaking of getting that buy-in and having those conversations, and I think that it's talking about bosses specifically and getting that buy-in from bosses and or from clients that you're working with who might be confused by SEO. You know, we've been talking a lot about people who are within this industry who are SEOs, be it first day or the 6,000th day. How do you think that it's harder to get that buy-in from, given that a lot of us are working from home now? Do you think it's made it easier? What are some of the pros and cons of that, or how can it get better if it's not good?
Yeah, for sure. I think distance in general can make it hard to get buy-in or have people understand what we're doing, because it's hard in general. Like, it's just hard in general. So adding any kind of complexity on top of that and working from home when you aren't used to doing that is definitely added complexity. So any kind of thing you want to throw in the mix makes a hard situation even harder.
Yeah.
I definitely think so. So when it comes to SEO, I mean, like, when you think about it, like, practitioners get confused. Like, I don't know if you all saw the fact that LinkedIn, like, someone de-indexed LinkedIn basically. Yeah. And that was a huge, I mean, that SEO is probably like super brilliant, super experienced. Mistakes happen. Things are confusing. We're not always clear on what tools do which things. And that's no one's fault. I mean, like, people make mistakes. It just happens that they work on a bigger site. But just the fact that that can happen to that experienced of a practitioner just goes to show that, like, SEO is confusing for us. It's going to be confusing for our stakeholders, our non-SEO stakeholders, whether they are our bosses or they are our clients. And so I think when it comes to that, like, we just need to be prepared to be professional educators too, and getting people involved in that. You know, like, I know back when I was on agency side and I, liaised with actual customers, our clients, one thing that they really appreciated was, if they had an idea, like, hey, I want to rank for this keyword, let's try this tactic, or so. And if it was not good, you don't want to discourage them, but, like, bringing them along with, like, hey, like, love your spirit, love this idea, but let's do something similar. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, like, kind of guiding them, but, keep encouraging them too, because you want that, that's the first step. Like, interest is the first step. So the fact that, like, your stakeholders are taking an interest enough to either have hired you or, well, I guess, yeah, either way they would have hired your agency or hired you in-house on their team. Like, that's interest. That's great. That's a good step one. Like, let's make sure we keep educating and keep training, because that is something that can help when it comes to our results. Because I know there's nothing more defeating than saying, like, hey, look at all this stuff I did, and then being like, it's just, I don't get it, or it's not enough, or it's not what I thought, and just because they don't understand. And so I think, like, being dedicated to that education is really important for that kind of thing. And like I said, like, it's going to be hard sometimes. Sometimes you're just going to have those bosses or those clients who just don't understand. They never seem to be happy or whatever it might be. But just, I know I've been there, but just trying to keep that patience and keep that education going is really, really important. And I think in terms of working from home, it's definitely a good way to practice, like, how we communicate, because in person, I think we take a lot of things for granted, but we have to be super, a lot more succinct and a lot more disciplined about how we communicate when we only have a small window of time or one phone call, or we're not relying on like interpersonal, like, facial cues or anything like that. So I think it's definitely a lot harder, but it's forcing us to get, like, really, really specific about how we communicate.
Absolutely. And I would say that given the circumstance, in my experience, at least, it seems like clients are that much more, our bosses are that much more understanding and utilizing the circumstance as we're all humans, we're all people. Like you were saying, we all make mistakes regardless of how long we've been doing a certain thing. And in turn, now that we're all working from home and it's like, how are the kids doing? Having animals bother you like crazy while you're working, like, everyone's experiencing that kind of thing. And it's very universal, as opposed to, I think that it is easy to forget that it's not everything is transactional. And in turn, when you are in this together, or you can get that buy-in, really ride that out and think about how you would want to be responded to.
Yeah.
And I think that that's incredibly important. Like you said, like not just saying or hearing, no, that's a bad idea. Like you and a billion other clients are going, or other customers are going after that one keyword. It's like, but I like where you're thinking. Let's get aggressive. Let's also, build the foundation and do these other things. And I think that's incredibly important.
Yep.
Yeah,
for sure.
but that's really all the questions that I had as far as the article goes. I again highly encourage anyone, even if you've read it before, read it again. I picked out little things the multiple times that I read this article in. The format's incredibly easy to digest. I'll stop complimenting it. It's great.
Thank you so
really
much. No, that's so awesome to hear
Yeah.
that it resonated. I've been really pleasantly surprised. And also too, I mean, like I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn and stuff. Like if you read this article and you have suggestions or thoughts, like I'd love to know those. Feel free to reach out and contribute your thoughts or questions on that, and could keep the conversation going.
Awesome, you guys. That was fantastic, and I will say highly relevant to now. I think all of us kind of feel a little bit of that from time to time, so thank you again so much for that. That brings us to, we're at 45 minutes now, so that was awesome. Let's give just a few more moments for everyone to pop in. If you guys do have any extra questions for Kameron or Tyler, or if you happen to myself, go ahead and pop those in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer those. As I mentioned at the top of the hour, we are going to be recording. So if you guys missed part of it, or you feeling burnt out and want to go back and check it out again, definitely be sure to check out that video. It's going to be up on pageonepower.com, as well as our YouTube and social. Or you can also read Kameron's article. So we'll be posting that as well. It doesn't look like we had any other questions pop in. So with
I
that,
have a question. I
that?
have another question.
Oh, yeah.
I was curious in any form of content, or I will say art, in the sense of you writing this out. You can tell that it was something that you were curious about, passionate about, you did research on. Is there anything in the article that you wish you would have added, or even something you're thinking about as far as what is next for this kind of topic? And if there isn't anything, I don't, there should be, but I'm just curious, like, is there anything, like kind of behind the curtain a little bit that you wish
Totally.
you
Yeah, no, I've thought about that for sure. Like just judging based on, how people have responded to it. I really think like, phase one is very much like, look, this was cathartic and that's what I needed right now. And also like kind of actionable because it had tips in there. But I think like a lot of people are like, okay, but like I want more kind of thing. Cause it like, obviously an article can't solve people's problems, but I've thought a lot, I wish be nice, but, but yeah, as far as like the article goes, I have definitely thought about the fact that like, what's the next step? Like we all felt kind of better, it seems like, after reading it, but what's the next step? And I think like the answer for me would be like, well, let's get more actionable, because we kind of like touched on some tips for like, hey, like maybe consider doing A, B, or C, but it wasn't like super tactical. So maybe getting more granular with some of those details is something I've thought about, or even just doing full articles on specific topics in there. Cause you could talk like for all day pretty much about like SEOs not having a seat at the table, for example. So kind of like expounding on that and having those be launch pads for exploring those topics in a little bit more depth. Those are definitely things that are on my mind. So I don't know if that would be interesting. I hope it would be, but that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking about, like where to go next.
That's great. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Great question. And actually, to close us out, we had one last question pop in. Andrew asks, Kameron, as a director of content, do you have any tips to avoid being burnt out while writing about SEO?
Yeah, definitely. I think, so it's interesting, that question, because, before I was a practitioner and now I'm on the vendor side. So I'm not doing SEO as much. I mean, I wear a lot of hats, so that's like potentially one of them. It's definitely one of them. But when it comes to like being on the vendor side, writing about SEO is actually, I found like a nice change of pace, and I haven't gotten burnt out of it yet. I think because it's still somewhat newer for me to do that. I've been doing that less time than I was an actual practitioner. So I do enjoy, I think that's just like kind of, I'm predisposed to liking that as well, because I really like explaining things and breaking things down. But if you're more of like a tactician and someone who doesn't like writing about SEO as much as like doing it, I would definitely say that like, if you can, lean on those people that do enjoy that. And maybe what I've done before is I have plenty of people that work at Botify who have a lot of ideas and they want to get some information out there. But what I'll do, because they don't like writing about it. A lot of people don't. So that's totally normal. So what I'll do is I'll just sit down and chat with them for 20 minutes and I'll kind of extrapolate information from that and I'll write it for them. So partnerships like that are great too, because if you want to write about SEO, but you're just like, I hate doing that. I like doing it. I don't like writing about it. Then potentially something like that could be beneficial.
Yeah, super good point. I think being able to lean on those relationships that we have, especially inside of, if you're internal with an organization, there tends to be writers and people in marketing and stuff that always have great ideas, but just maybe don't quite fully understand how to flesh those out. So awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you guys both again so much for hopping in here. I know that Tyler, you popped in last minute. I know that was a little bit of a change and that was awesome. Cameron, thank you so much for joining us. We'll have to have you guys both on again soon.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you both.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Thanks again, you guys. We'll see you hopefully soon.
Yeah, definitely. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Bye.